1 minute. We're live.
Hello and welcome to our session, Heritage and Wellbeing, a humanistic approach to sustainable management. Thank you for joining us today. Our panel is made up of academics from Manchester Metropolitan University, including myself, Amy Luck, and Dr. Faye Sayer, who specialises in the social value of heritage, especially wellbeing and mental health, alongside heritage professionals Mark Pickle, who is Senior Vice President of Finance at Biltmore, Sally Ambrose, Head of Visitor Experience and Marketing at Chatsworth, and Tom Hendry, Sustainability Officer at the Devonshire Group. In this session, we will discuss how to develop a sustainable management framework focused on considering well-being as a mechanism for economic, social, cultural and environmental resilience and growth, support public historians and organisations to build capacity to evaluate and support visitor well-being within the visit experience, share strategies and frameworks applied to Biltmore and Chatsworth to support their integration within more public history organisations, and create a professional hub to facilitate networking to build sector-wide capacity in this arena. So this session will start with a presentation where Faye will discuss what wellbeing is and why it's important to understand and investigate this. I will discuss how to measure wellbeing in a heritage context, and Mark, Sally and Tom will discuss what incorporating sustainability and wellbeing means to and for Biltmore Estate, Chatsworth House and the Devonshire Group. We will then encourage you to ask any questions you may have, either via the chat function or by audio or video, and open a dialogue with us about wellbeing in the heritage sector. I'd ask all attendees to ensure that you're muted, and if you can save any questions until the end of the presentation section, just in case any answers are provided by a subsequent speaker. So, without any further ado, Faye, would you like to kick things off?
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much for coming as well today, everybody. And it's lovely to virtually meet you all. Hopefully one day we'll actually meet in person. Things are getting better. We really hope that today enables us to have a bit of a discussion as professionals about how we start looking at the impact that the work we do with people, can support well-being and human dignity and support these social values that we know anecdotally make a huge difference. So hopefully this will start us thinking about how we can integrate it better within our practice, and also what we can all do to support each other. So what is well-being? Well, the concept of well-being is really complex, as I think we all know. It was introduced by WHO in 1948, and it introduces a state. Health is a state of complex physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. Factors which impacted well-being at this point included things like income, work, education, health, relationships, loneliness, and the environment. But as we all know, well-being can also be impacted by external conditions. And these can all be measured were all measured by four categories: quality of life, life satisfaction, subjective well-being, and happiness. The New Economic Foundation suggested that personal well-being comprises of two main elements: feeling good and functioning well. Feelings of happiness, contentment, enjoyment, curiosity, and engagement are all characteristics of someone who has a positive experience of their life. Therefore, good well-being. Equally important for well-being is our functioning in the world. Experiencing positive relationships, having some control over one's life, having a sense of purpose are all important attributes for well-being. The New Economics Foundation Accounts of Wellbeing framework broke this down even further and provided us with some more detail to understand the more nuanced aspects of well-being. This was created through researching and investigating the individual experiences of over 40,000 people across 22 European countries. No mean feat, probably not a survey I want to undertake anytime soon. Results suggested personal well-being is made up of 5 main components, some of which are broken into subcomponents. These are emotional well-being. They perceived emotional well-being as being the overall balance between the feelings we have and the frequency we have in experiencing positive and negative emotions. This meant that and included positive feelings, i.e. how often we felt positive emotions, such as happiness, relaxed, and the absence of negative feelings, so the times we felt negative emotions, such as sadness, worry, stress. They also suggested that personal well-being was related to having a satisfying life, having a positive evaluation of your overall life, your contentment, and also vitality. This can be related to kind of physical well-being, the feeling of having energy or feeling well rested and healthy and being physically active. Another component was resilience and self-esteem. This was measured by things like how good you felt about yourself, or how optimistic you felt about the future, or how resilient you felt, how you felt able to deal with life's difficulties. And the last in personal well-being, the last component, was positive functioning. Deemed as kind of, you're doing well. And the subcomponents contain things like autonomy, feeling that you have the ability to choose and do what you want and do it in your own time. You have freedom of choice. Competence, feeling accomplished in what you do, being able to use your abilities. And engagement, a feeling of you go somewhere and you're absorbed in it, that you have opportunities to learn as well. And then the last was meaning and purpose, that you felt what you did was valuable, that going, for instance, to a heritage site was valuable, worthwhile, but also valued by others. The other component they looked at was social well-being, and they suggested this was made up of 2 specific components: supportive relationships, therefore the extent in which something enables you or you feel You have quality interactions with close relations, i.e. family, friends, people who support you and you support them. And that you have trust and belonging. That you feel you can trust people and you are trusted by them. That you're being treated fairly and you're respected. And that you feel a sense of belonging to a place or with people that you live by. The New Economic Foundations also simplified this in many senses. They suggested there were 5 key steps you could take to improve your mental health and well-being. They suggested that the first of these steps was to connect with people around you, with your family, friends, colleagues and neighbours, whether that be at home or work or at school or in your local community, to find a mechanism to support connection. The second was to be active. You could support your well-being by going for a walk or a run, or going outside more, by playing a game, cycling, even gardening, perhaps taking a walk around your local heritage site. The third was to take notice, to be curious of that what's around you and surrounds you, to enjoy the moment and to be aware of the world around you and what you are feeling, taking notice of your heritage, the archaeological and historical sites you see around you. The fourth was to keep learning, to try something new, to set a challenge, to achieve something new and enjoy doing it. And the fifth was to give, to do something nice for someone or something nice for your community, to volunteer your time, to join a community group, to look outwards as well as inwards. The Wheel of Wellbeing was similarly developed to support finding mechanisms for people to support their own well-being. They also suggested there was 5 steps to improve well-being, which was to be active, that was about your body, keep learning, which was about your mind, your spirit, to give, people to connect, and place to take notice. But they also added within this the planet, to care, considering your environmental and sustainability issues that surround us, considering how you support and care for the planet and the environment around you. I suppose a critical question here is, given these ways to well-being and the wheel of well-being, the steps we can take to improve well-being, can public history and heritage actually enable us to improve well-being? Do they meet these 5 steps? Well, as many of us know, working in the public history arena, in the heritage arena, there's extensive anecdotal and qualitative evidence that indicates heritage can improve well-being. Improve well-being by facilitating some of these ways to well-being. But this also includes things like building confidence, supporting teamwork, to support learning, to enable you to develop supportive relationships and enjoyable relationships with your family and friends, to break down barriers between people, to reduce antisocial behaviour, to improve our communication skills. We know that heritage and public history can help develop feelings of ownership and belonging to a place and to a community, and to help develop this sense of community. There's been some more recent research on the impacts of museums and archaeological sites on well-being, specifically work by Chatterjee and Thompson at UCL. More about this later. And that participation in specific museum and mental health and well-being intervention programs can impact well-being, specifically in those 5 ways to well-being, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Yet despite all this anecdotal evidence and evidence from specific programs, the unique impact of public history sector on well-being has not been consistently, strategically, or systematically studied. But why is it important to investigate this and investigate the impact on well-being and public history? Well, well-being has become a central theme in political discussion. It is the epicenter of many public policies and policy documents, including those relating to specifically to heritage. Well-being, lowering well-being and inequality, reducing wellness poverty is a political priority for many international and national organisations and governments, including UNESCO, the World Health Organization, to name just a few. Global and inter-organisational focus on well-being has resulted in well-being being connected to various internal and international policies. International policies that include well-being include health, security, sustainability, reduction of poverty and education. Well-being is perceived to impact a range of development agendas, and it bridges interdisciplinary boundaries, and it can be incorporated into broader global and national political strategies. Yet how can public history organisations such as heritage sites and museums start to provide evidence that assets support social, economic, environmental, sustainable development, including these organisations and the communities, and including for the organisation, society, and wider communities? How can museums provide evidence-based strategies for sustainable development goals and agendas? For example, what roles do public history sites and their work have within the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Agendas, or UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals? For example, what evidence is there that heritage sites and public history organisations currently support things like the Sustainable Development Goal 3, good health and well-being, or Sustainable Development Goal 4, quality education, or 5, gender equality, or 8, decent work and economic growth? The big question really is, can formative evaluation of well-being and human dignity offer scope to suggest mechanisms by which public history organisations can support these goals in the future? And how could a programme be designed to meet these goals? Government heritage agencies and organisations have identified a deficit in sector-wide, robust, empirical and statistically significant evidence relating to acknowledged impact of heritage and public history sites. There's a deficit in the knowledge of whether visitor and community well-being is affected by public history. Agencies and organisations have indicated that to have application beyond the public history sector, including for mental health provisions such as social prescribing and wider sustainability agendas, there needs to be, and there's a requirement to provide and apply public healthcare and psychologically accredited well-being measurements and significant longitudinal analysis of change in well-being directly linked to public history sites, to heritage sites. Well-being has been measured in public health through self-reported individual emotional reactions and judgments relating to subjective well-being, such as happiness, life satisfaction, and quality of life. The New Economic Foundation's 5 Ways to Wellbeing, to connect, to be active, to take notice, to keep learning, to give, link wellbeing, both the economy and wider societal values. For heritage sites to support positive wellbeing and be part of mental health provision, they must create and support the conditions in which these attributes, these 5 evidence-based actions for wellbeing, can thrive. Perhaps if we take a pragmatic, empirical and humanistic approach to investigating the impact of heritage sites and public history sites on visitor subjective well-being and human dignity, regarding visiting heritage and historical sites as an ethnographic process in which people's experiences of heritage can influence and impact their lives and their personal well-being traits, then with the support of public health professionals, we can design, implement and employ evidence-based strategies to provide measurable results for the unique impact of public history, which at present is lacking. Providing this psychologically robust empirical research into these hypothesized transformative impacts of public history on well-being is economically, socially and politically critical and really timely for the profession. This includes heritage's role within mental health provision and well-being associated to these sustainable development policies and agendas, including on social prescribing programmes and preventative health programmes. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Faye. So I'm going to talk to you now about how we measure well-being. So by utilising published and piloted industry standard measures for in-person and online quantitative and qualitative data capture and analysis of change to well-being, heritage professionals can fill the evidence gap that Faye has mentioned. This approach has been applied to a range of heritage projects internationally by Faye and myself, including at Chatsworth and at Biltmore. Our approach requires the implementation of a mixed method, multidisciplinary and multi-phased empirical approach to social value data collection and analysis. This incorporates qualitative methodologies such as consultation workshops and focus groups, open questionnaires and surveys, semi-structured interviews, feedback walls, comment cards and comment space, self-reflection, observation, as well as quantitative methods. These methods are used alongside these quantitative pre-post public health care and psychologically accredited measures for assessing well-being change. There are multiple quantitative methods available to assess well-being, usually based on a modified visual analog scale, including the World Health Organization's 5 Wellbeing Index, the Patient Health Questionnaire, the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, and the UK's Office for National Statistics Wellbeing Survey. We have successfully trialled a combination of 2 of these measures. Firstly, the Modified Wellbeing Survey that integrates questions from psychologically accredited surveys for measuring wellbeing, including the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, along with questions that incorporate those New Economic Foundation 5 evidence-based actions for wellbeing and the National Accounts Framework Wellbeing Personal and Social Wellbeing Indicators. We have also incorporated the Positive and Negative Effect Schedule, which is a public health care accredited measure specifically developed to identify change in wellbeing through positive and negative emotions, measured through scoring positive and negative words in various formats. Surveys also collect demographic data, including locality, age, disability, ethnicity, and context data, such as the motivation for and nature of the visit. Visitors are asked to complete this survey, which includes both the PANAS and MWS and qualitative questions before and after visiting. This can be done in multiple ways. If visitors book or purchase tickets online before surveys can be embedded in ticket confirmation emails, and a link to the after survey sent out via email. Alternatively, surveys can be administered in person via tablets or paper surveys at the entrance and exit of the site. Data collection can also include arranging pre- and post interviews or focus groups with key stakeholders and audiences, and creating spaces for visitors to share their feelings, such as comment walls or feedback postcards. Individuals before and after surveys are paired to enable measurement of change. Individuals who did not complete both surveys are withdrawn from the dataset. Change between before and after mean averages are calculated, and statistical hypothesis testing is conducted using SPSS. Non-parametric related sample tests, such as the Wilcoxon signed rank test or the pair sample sign test, test the significance of quantitative results gathered via surveys and the probability that any change to well-being was not a result of chance and showed a true reflection of the target population. Results are deemed to be statistically significant when the tests return a p-value below 0.05, 5%, and highly significant below 0.01, 1%. Two-tailed tests are conducted to test for change to well-being rather than improvement or reduction. The direction of change can then be determined by the greater number of positive or negative differences observed in matched pairs. Standard deviation differences between the before and after data can be calculated to assess whether variability has increased or decreased after visiting a heritage site. Standard deviation demonstrates how far away on average each answer is from the mean. The smaller the standard deviation, the more results are clustered around the mean and the less variability in the data. Qualitative data from open-ended questions, free commentary space, observations and conversations is then analysed thematically to identify contributory factors for change and look for links to the National Accounts of Wellbeing Framework indicators. Word count analysis is conducted using in vivo software, and qualitative data often enables further understanding of how individuals were impacted by and felt about their visit, and how future visits could be improved or better tailored to suit individual needs. Quantitative and qualitative results are then triangulated to ensure validity. As with any research method, there are limitations to these methods. However, using these methods and tools can provide robust and statistically significant evidence that healthcare heritage and policy professionals require to co-produce strategies utilising heritage sites in social prescribing programmes and mental health provision. So that is the end of our part. So I'm going to introduce Mark now, who's going to talk about Biltmore Estate and their approach to wellbeing.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Pickle, and I'm here to represent today Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina, and our current thinking on a humanistic management approach or leadership approach to an estate experience. So my role here today is try to articulate as best I can how we can take this research that has just been described to you and turn it into a practical application of developing strategies for guest experiences for the visitors to our estate. Next slide, please. To give you a brief history of Biltmore Estate for those who are unfamiliar with Biltmore. This is a brief history of the estate. George Washington Vanderbilt purchased over 120,000 acres of land in the Appalachian Mountains, the southern Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, to build a grand chateau and what he hoped would be a sustainable working estate. Mr. Vanderbilt hired two prominent architects to help him design and develop the estate, the first being the prominent architect of the Gilded Age, Richard Morris Hunt. And Richard Morris Hunt created Biltmore House after touring the Loire Valley, France, and several other locations in Europe with Mr. Vanderbilt to gather inspiration for what he hoped would be the grandest French chateau estate in the United States. Mr. Vanderbilt also hired the prominent landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted. And Olmsted considered Biltmore Estate the crown jewel of his very long design career. Olmsted, earlier in his career, had designed Central Park in New York City and other prominent parks. He was inspired deeply by Capability Brown in the UK and took great inspiration from him as he developed these formal landscapes. Olmsted was famous for landscapes that were not only formal gardens, but also were very natural, that you would, if you see them, you would think they were natural effect, but they were indeed planned by Mr. Olmsted. Just as an aside, this is the 200th anniversary celebration of Frederick Law Olmsted's birthday throughout the United States. And Biltmore is participating with many other heritage sites around the US to celebrate his birthday. And we've opened a brand new Olmsted Heritage Trail with interpretive panels of a couple of miles that our guests can enjoy and learn about Mr. Olmsted. Mr. Vanderbilt opened the house on Christmas Eve, 1895, to friends and family, and they had a grand celebration at Christmas time for the opening of this great chateau. The estate was opened to the public in 1930 when the mayor of Asheville, North Carolina, came to Mr. Vanderbilt, his descendants, the Cecils, and asked could they open the house, at least part of the house, to the public to promote cultural tourism during the Depression. And Mr. Cecil agreed to that. And as we look at the estate today, we've created 4 brand personality traits, almost trying to personify what we want the brand to be. It's an aspirational estate and an aspirational experience. And to your left, you can see 4 words that we use to describe the estate experience. We want it to be authentic. We want it to be welcoming. We'll talk about this in a bit of detail in just a second. We want it to be elegant, and we want it to be timeless. Next slide, please. The estate today is what we refer to as a cultural destination internally. So we want the estate to be a place to immerse people in a cultural experiences with historic storytelling in support. I've listed here 3 of Biltmore's vision statements, and I think they're important enough to reflect on, to get a sense of who Biltmore is and who we're trying to be. The first is that we would like to offer America's most gratifying cultural and aesthetic experience centered on a legacy of gracious hospitality. And I'm going to dive into that in just a bit to explain that in greater detail. We would like to be renowned for our people who inspire and enrich the human spirit. This is the first sense that you begin to get a humanistic leadership approach into our vision statements. And thirdly, we'd like to be a model of historic preservation through private enterprise. So Biltmore is unusually, at least in the United States, a for-profit venture. It's still family owned. So the owners and the senior leaders of Biltmore today are direct descendants of George Vanderbilt. Today, we currently host over 1.3 million guests annually, and the estate consists of 8,000 acres, including Biltmore House, which you see the image on the screen, the Vanderbilt Fine Art Collection, which still remains in the house as is from the Gilded Age, several of the gardens that Olmsted developed, as we spoke about. It is still today a working farm with cattle, sheep, crops, and solar fields and other things that we manage on the estate. So it is still an active working farm. We also have Biltmore as the first, the initial managed forestry program in the United States. And we have a strong legacy of managing historic forest and conserving and protecting the forest in the Southern Appalachian Mountains. We have an exhibition hall. We have the most visited winery in the United States, and 2 hotels and several restaurants and retail outlets. Next slide, please. So that's who we are and who we've been briefly. There's an important aspect as we talk about humanistic management at Biltmore of ethics that runs throughout this entire presentation. And if you think of the great ethical thinkers, Aristotle and others, they used a Greek term called eudaimonia to describe that which is supportive of human flourishing. And that's what humanistic management at Biltmore is aimed to do, to support human flourishing, to promote it. And you'll see throughout this presentation that ethical thread of human flourishing throughout. So next slide, please. So as we begin to think about how you apply humanistic management and ethics as it appears in the creation of the corporate strategies at Biltmore. So we'll start at the top, the highest level, and we'll work our way down to the guest level. We've created 4 strategic initiatives that at the corporate level that attempt to describe what we're trying to achieve. One of those 4 strategic initiatives, which should be at least a decade long in the making, would be to create a collaborative culture that elevates human dignity and expands potential and prioritizes well-being. So this is where we take a stand with a guiding principle that this is what we are trying to do at Biltmore as we design the experiences that we create. So that is one of our 4 strategic initiatives that will last at least a decade. We have a senior leadership belief at Biltmore that we live in a time, and we're all aware of this, everyone who works in this field, we live in a time where academic journals refer to this often as disorientation, or a time of psychological vertigo. That to me is even more descriptive. But what it means is that we're living in a time of changing cultural expectations. And there's this rapid impact of technology of the way we communicate and even the way we deliver healthcare that we've all been involved in the last few years. We live in a time of evolving societal values, and this is of great importance. And all of this has created this sense of uncertainty and cultural complexity. Well, for a cultural destination or a heritage site like Biltmore, and you'll see some very similarities in Chatsworth, we have an opportunity. And what we would like to do is offer a sense of welcoming and belonging, what we call internally a cultural oasis, where all who arrive are provided our authentic art of gracious hospitality. So we have this objective that I've stated in presentations many times internally, that, as plainly as I can state it, we would like to create a place where our guests can simply remember their humanity, that we give them a moment where they can escape from this cultural complexity for just a brief period and remember why they are important and why they exist. Next slide, please. So to apply this concept, we've utilized a model, a polarity of humanistic versus economistic worldviews that you see on your screen. And I have to cite Michael Person, who I believe is a seminal work in humanistic management and worth a read. And this is a paraphrase from his book, his fine book. An economistic worldview, if we'll start on the right side of the polarity, you may recall the University of Chicago economist Milton Friedman. He had a purpose for business that he stated in the 1960s, and it has been taught in the US business schools ever since. And that social purpose of a business is to increase shareholder wealth. It's a very limited scope purpose. And typically in an economistic worldview, a business would manage hierarchically to maximize their efficiencies. On the opposite end of this continuum of worldviews is a humanistic worldview. And it takes a little broader stance where it's not just about increasing shareholder wealth, it's about improving stakeholder well-being and human dignity. Human dignity is slightly different than well-being in that dignity is an unconditional, inherent value of all human beings. So it's a recognition that just by existing, humans have a sense of dignity that should be respected. And we use systems thinking, which is just a metacognitive model to help understand complex relationships and interactions. So the point of this polarity is not to say your organization would be optimal at A or B. A polarity means you're seeking the balance, the proper or the appropriate or the optimal balance between humanistic and economistic that's proper for your organization. And we've done just that at Biltmore. And over time, we're evolving the culture to a more humanistic and less economistic model. Next slide, please. To apply that polarity in practice, we take that concept, we use systems thinking to understand how do we create value at Biltmore and how value creation, most importantly, is interconnected. And we've defined 5 groups or categories of value creation. The first being employee value. And we would like to create a culture of safety and belonging for our employees. If we can increase the well-being of our employee, they will deliver well-being to our guests, which is incredibly important. We also want to create operational value by immersing guests in an oasis of beauty, and we want to work with operational excellence. We'd also like to create guest value, and that's delivering carefully curated experience, which we all try to do in this industry. We want to create all of that plus enterprise value. And enterprise value will allow us to thrive for generations. We're a multi-generational company, and we would like to thrive for several more generations into the future. And then perhaps most importantly and most aspirational is societal value. We would like to positively influence the world in whatever way we can by creating this value linkages. So the important aspect of this model is understanding how each of these value creation groups are interconnected and supportive of one another. So what we do is when we evaluate experiential strategies on the estate, we can push those strategies through this value model to help understand how we're creating value for each stakeholder group. This is the beginnings of taking humanistic leadership practices into application. Next slide, please. So how do we apply that humanistic leadership approach to guest experience strategy development? And I want to spend just a few minutes on the next slide, but it's what I call a nexus of experiences that we're intentionally trying to create for our guests to experience. So next slide, please. What you'll see on the screen is a Venn diagram of 3 different experiences that we intentionally create for our guests. And we'll start at the top with gracious hospitality and work our way around clockwise. And I hope I can clearly articulate how this might affect guest well-being and human dignity. We call what we deliver to our guests the art of gracious hospitality. It's not a philosophy. A philosophy would be something we believe. These words are chosen very carefully. It's an art because art is something you create. And when our guests interact with our frontline staff, each staff person with every guest they interact with, each employee has an opportunity to create art, to say you're welcome, to smile, to look them in the eye, to ensure that they feel like they're important and they recognize and respect their dignity. That is a great gift that our employees can give to our guests. It's also gracious in that when people come through the front entrance of the estate, we want to make sure that they feel welcome. It doesn't matter who you are, what your life circumstance is, you are welcome here and you belong here, and we're happy you're here. And it's not just when we talk about hospitality, that is also a welcoming, but it's more than that. It's not to say we're happy you're here, it's to say our day would be incomplete without you here. That's the kind of framework that we want to, humanistic framework that we want to train our staff to do. And they do a fantastic job at delivering the art of gracious hospitality. The second, moving clockwise, is aesthetic experiences. Aesthetic experiences are what I would just call the beauty of place. And when you see an estate like Biltmore or an estate as beautiful as Chatsworth, which you'll see shortly, there is just simply a beauty of place. Aesthetic experiences, when I think of aesthetic experiences, I think of the effect of art. And if you are an art historian or you have an art museum, you have seen the impact that art can have, the psychological impact that art can have to a visitor to the point that they're moved. There's many journal articles and books written on the psychology of art, and you can dig into that as deeply as you would like. But art does create a sense of curiosity, and curiosity can create an opportunity to learn, and learning can hopefully create an opportunity for self-reflection. So when I stand in front of a Monet landscape and I see the light and I think the picture is a bit melancholy, I think about melancholy in my life, and I reflect on how I've experienced melancholy, and then I'm moved. So art can create a psychological effect of being moved. When you go to a place like Biltmore or Chatsworth, you will be bombarded by the beauty of place. The beauty of place is everywhere, and you have many opportunities in different ways to experience what I would call art. But there's fine art, there's architecture, there's gardens, there's landscapes, there's vistas, there's farmyard, there's culinary, there's wine, there's music. All the things that we present, all these aesthetic experiences we present are preparing our guests to reflect and to connect. So those are deliberate aesthetic experiences that we try to create for our ideal guest experience. The third and final circle is what we call storied experiences. And everyone on this call will understand the power of storytelling or the effect of story. Storied experiences at Biltmore are designed to not only allow us the opportunity to articulate and deliver compelling and authentic stories through carefully curated stories, but it also is, in our sense, a way that we need to understand when do we stand silent? When do we allow space for the guests to create their own storied experiences? And I know we've all seen this. I know the folks at Chatsworth have seen this too. It hasn't been just a few weeks where I saw a mother and a young daughter, clearly a young daughter, and the young daughter was chasing butterflies through the rose garden in our walled garden. And the look of joy on both their faces was incredibly powerful. They won't go home and remember the story of Olmsted's creation of the walled garden and the rose garden. What they will remember is their storied experience where those two people, those two loved ones connected in our gardens. So we need to speak when we need to speak, and we need to be silent when we need to be silent to give our guests an opportunity to experience their own or create their own storied experiences. So there is the effect of welcoming, there's the effect of beauty, and there's the effect of story that all combine into this intersection or this nexus of strategies that support well-being. So when we create experiential strategies at Biltmore, we want to think about this nexus and keep a good balance of that nexus. And we believe that strategies that are most effective at affecting well-being and human dignity reside in that intersection of these three circles. Next slide, please. Once we have designed experiences, we would like to understand how cultural heritage sustainability is supported by well-being. But to do that, we've got to understand our guest through research, and everything that has been described prior to me is how we capture data, qualitative and quantitative data, to help us understand our guest and how we might impact their well-being in a positive way. So we've got to take that research and turn it into practice. Next slide, please. And we do that by evaluating our guests' well-being. And those of you who are in marketing, I know there's some wonderful marketers here today. I assume there are, but we need to understand the psychographic nature of our guests as uniquely valuable individuals. We need to understand their attitudes, their aspirations, and their interests. They are unconditionally inherent value to each one, and we need to understand them. Marketing often talks about demographic segmentation. That, and I mean, no offense to marketing, but that is marketing. What we're looking for is psychographic learning that informs the design of our authentic experiences to create more meaningful guest connectivity. So the project that Dr. Sayer laid out earlier, it is designed to do just that, to capture well-being and dignity data through pre-visit and post-visit surveys so that we can then take it and analyze it and inform our experiential strategies supportive of guest well-being and human dignity. Next slide, please. There are some initial results that we've gotten from the survey, and some were, to be honest, they're unexpected findings and things that I did not expect to see. The surveys are still being run, and they will be run for many more months. So this is not a final finding, but it is an indication that a visit, if you go back and think of Dr. Sayer's original chart that looked kind of like an org chart, that there was different kinds of social well-being, different strata of well-being. And what we are beginning to see is that perhaps a visit to Biltmore may be supportive of social well-being. And that's where people interact with one another, that we're very supportive of their social interactions and feeling good about the people they came into contact with during their visit. A visit to Biltmore may not be as supportive of personal or emotional well-being. And this was a surprising preliminary finding. And we need to understand that. How can it be that well-being in one category is more impactful in a visit than in another category? And we need to understand that. So the question that we've begun asking ourselves is, have we positioned Biltmore as a leisure destination? Is it a modern experience of historic property rather than a cultural destination, a true cultural destination that enriches one's life? That gives us food for thought that we did not have prior to the survey, because then we can ask ourselves, can we create new experiential strategies to improve guest personal and emotional well-being? So can we be very intentional about our future strategies? Next slide, please. So while we're thinking about improving the guest experience on the estate, we think we've come up with at least 5 things that we've learned from these preliminary findings. One, that aesthetic and storied experiences must be authentic. Not all stories are pleasant and not all stories are positive, but they need to be authentically told. And that's important to build trust and support the well-being of our guests. Secondly, hospitality must be gracious. It must be a gift of openness and welcoming to all. If you come through the gate, you get the unmerited gift of a welcome. You belong here and you're included. Third, our guests are individuals of great unconditional intrinsic value, and our experience strategies should reflect their unique attitudes, aspirations, and interests. Fourthly, sustainability requires we remain relevant to these evolving societal values and cultural interactions. We cannot remain static in our experiential design, or we run the risk of being irrelevant in the future. And lastly, experiences must be accessible. And many presentations in this conference will speak to accessibility. But in my mind, accessibility means it has to be physically accessible. Can I access the story? It has to be alternative storytelling accessible. Does the story speak to me? Is it relevant to me? And it has to be economically accessible. Can I even afford to access the story? Next slide, please. So the future state of Biltmore, to wrap this up, is that we have created well-being and human dignity not only as strategic initiatives or strategic pillars of who we want to be and where we're going, but they are guiding principles that will develop Biltmore's future sustainability strategies around. The guiding principles are the guardrails that are going to keep us in the direction that we want to go into the future. Our 10-year corporate strategies incorporate well-being throughout every plank of the ideal guest experience, and that will occur even more as we're moving forward. We've existed 127 years today, and we hope to be around another 127 years at least, and that requires this commitment to this humanistic leadership approach and focus on well-being and human dignity. Next slide, please. To conclude, I would just say, what we're committed to at Biltmore, and perhaps this is something that could inspire others that are trying to do the same thing, is we're simply trying to create a time and a place to remember one's humanity. And we think this humanistic leadership approach and this understanding of well-being and human dignity and support of human flourishing is a way that will sustain us into the future. And with that, I will pass it to Sally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to have met Mark in person and to visit Biltmore. Well, it was quite some years ago, but it's still really interesting to see how many similarities there are in terms of our journeys. And I'm sure that some of that will come out in the conversations and the chat that we have. So I am the marketing, head of marketing and visitor experience at the Chatsworth estate. And I'm literally just starting a new role, which is head of brand communications and audiences, looking at research and insight in more detail. So something I'm really excited to be part of. So Amy, next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of history, again, just to put Chatsworth into context. So the lady at the top of the screen is the Countess of Shrewsbury, better known as Bess of Hardwicke, and she was a formidable woman. In fact, originally from Derbyshire, she grew to become the second most powerful and wealthy woman in England after the Queen, which was Queen Elizabeth I at the time. And she married 4 times. She's very canny. And it was her second husband, which you can see on the screen here, Sir William Cavendish. And it is that line which continues today with regard to the Cavendish family, who then became Dukes of Devonshire. Nothing to do with the location at all. It just happened to be a spare title. So you can see here the main part of where the Chatsworth House is from the 1550s. And the hunting tower is the little sort of building you can see right at the top and top left. Next slide, please. So moving further forwards, in the 1580s, the hunting tower, it still stands today above Chatsworth. It's that very small little thing on the hill in the top image there. And you'll see the Chatsworth House there in the foreground. That's actually the original house, which was a Tudor house built out of brick. And that was the house that was built for Bess of Hardwicke, and it was pretty fabulous at the time. But what actually happened then was that over time, it was decided by, in the 1680s, that the first Duke, who became a Duke from becoming an Earl, or very sort of, William and Orange, very sort of political side of things and support. You'll know the history far better than I do. I'm much better at research and stats. But the first Duke then began constructing his new version of Chatsworth House. And you can see in the bottom corner, you can see where the Baroque palace is there, the square of it, and the very, very formal gardens that were introduced. And it was finished just before the first Duke died in 1707. And it just shows how layers and layers of history and start to take shape, both in the natural and in the built heritage and the environment at Chatsworth. And it does keep changing through generation to generation. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about the current, or more current, in the 1950s, but also to set the context that actually in the 1700s, Chatsworth was actually built to show off. Specifically, the Baroque house you can see more clearly here in the background. And people came on the railway to the local village of Roseley. And it was there that they walked from Roseley to Chatsworth, which was probably a few miles. And they walked around the garden. So that was basically for their weekend constitutional to take in fresh air. Obviously that was considered to be beneficial for one's well-being. And then they were entered into the house to have a look around the house in a form of time ticketing, as we do today. And it all sounds very sort of familiar when you look at it. But also this sense of coming out of the city, going to what was called at the time the pleasure gardens, to get away from the hustle and bustle of towns or cities or sort of places where the air quality wasn't as good, and to get out into the countryside to breathe fresh air and to feel, I suppose, in a sense of space around you. And the thing about Chatsworth was, it was built by humans to be a work of art. And I can explain a little bit more about in a moment and the impact that that has on people. So it's always been open. But 1950s is when the 11th Duke and Duchess took over, when the Duke's father passed away, and that's when Chatsworth popularity really soared. So during World War II, the house was occupied by a girls' college from Wales, and they lived in the house until the Duke and Duchess then started to work on the house in order to make it their family home. And in 1957, when the picture here of Duchess Deborah and Duke Andrew was taken in 1957, when they moved into the house. And because the family had had some tragic family circumstances with the loss of some of their key members who were dukes at the time, in 1981, it was really the time when Duke Andrew decided to safeguard Chatsworth forever for everyone to be able to enjoy. And he set up the Chatsworth House Trust. And that is a registered charity that still runs the house, the garden, the park, and the adventure playground and farmyard for everyone to enjoy. Next slide, please. So, we're in coloured photographs now, fantastic. So here you have the 12th Duke and Duchess. So that's Duchess Amanda, and we'll call him Stoker, but actually his name is Duke Peregrine, but we don't call him that, just call him Duke. And they moved into the house when his father passed away, and they have been in the house now since 2005-06. And they are so amazing. They actually form part of the thing that makes people feel like Chatsworth is a place to be, the sense of family and belonging. And they love sharing Chatsworth, and we love sharing Chatsworth with people. It's just not the same if people aren't there. So over 1 million visitors come every year to the house, the garden, the farmyard, parkland, and our events. And the parkland itself is 1,000 acres. And I know Mark referenced Capability Brown. Of Capability Brown landscape that is free and able for anyone to access. And unlike quite a lot of places, it has a road that actually runs through the estate, and you can see the house, and you can see the Emperor Fountain, which used to be the tallest gravity-fed water fountain, which is really spectacular. And it is that sense where people actually just want to drive through the park because it makes them feel good. They like to see it. It's beautiful. It's a wow moment. And so that view, how it is made in the landscape, is just absolutely breathtaking. There are so many people who actually refer to, in research we've done over the years, as Chatsworth is my Chatsworth, which is that real sense of belonging and being connected to a place. And being one gentleman we filmed for our internal colleague briefings during lockdown, when people were allowed to visit from local areas. And we open the gardens and the park were open, and the park's open anyway, for people to come in and to walk and just to basically get some time out. And he described it as Chatsworth being his little piece of heaven, which is wonderful. It is absolutely an eyes up place, and somewhere that, although we would love to be able to welcome more people, we are connecting with people digitally now as well. Next slide, please, Amy. So how do we use and how do we develop our core stories, our narratives? How do we want to engage and enrich people's lives? Well, we put together sort of overarching aim that we wanted to provoke, relate, and reveal the stories of Chatsworth to create lifelong memories and experiences that will enrich people's lives in a positive way. And everybody does take away their own special memory, and it means my Chatsworth means different things to different people. So we have started to explore what those differences, mean for different people. And our core stories, these are the things that we really, really want to help. That if people understand these, they don't have to understand all of them at the same time, but they start to really understand what we're about and our relevance in the 21st century, then we have got more opportunity for people to be able to understand why we're here, what we're doing, what our purpose is, but also to connect with us. And then that we could hopefully continue that connection so that they can be part of the Chatsworth family and the Chatsworth community, and that this becomes a place for them and then their Chatsworth. So a few things there that I'm sure will be the continuing history of hospitality and excellence, very much what Mark was referencing with regard to Biltmore, but also for us there's curiosity and innovation, and for curious minds there are so many different things at Chatsworth that we really want to bring to the fore, so people will find out something different every time they visit. There's always something new and something different to see. Next slide please, Amy. When we're looking very much to the future, and we obviously the family have had 16 generations of the family, and the Duke and the Duchess at the moment do live in the house, and we're in this period of transition between one set of family to the next generation in a gradual process. But one of the things we did, I think it was in 2019, we started to really link into our purpose and our commitment to our shared future. And this is where we created 10 goals for the next 10 years. And one of those actually is to improve the quality of life and well-being of our local communities. And when we refer to local communities, we mean people who live and work at Chatsworth, as well as the local community residents, people who work in the local community, our colleagues, and our visitors and guests. And one of the reasons that this is so important is that Chatsworth isn't going anywhere. We're not going to sell Chatsworth, it's not going to move. And we have a role as custodians and stewards of the landscape and the built heritage to ensure that we thrive and our communities thrive, and vice versa. And I know Tom will pick on this a little bit more when he follows. And the family have always been really aware of what Chatsworth means to people and the impact it has on communities and their responsibilities to prevent things that may cause a negative impact, such as queues of cars, traffic, all sorts of other, noise, anything like that, in terms of turning that into the positive to improve the quality of life and the well-being of our local communities. And that's something that we now report on every year, and we support a significant number of local organisations, businesses, charities, food banks, and also in terms of helping our local communities in terms of key stakeholders and partners. There's also a very detailed section of talks, tours and workshops that we develop both on site and online. Again, all linked into well-being and also making more space for nature, which is another of our projects. Well, it's not actually a project, it's a strand that runs through everything we do. If you'd like to know any more about that, I've put the website address at the bottom so you can see it from there. Next slide, Amy, please. So Chatsworth is part of the Devonshire Group, and the Devonshire Group is, it represents all the family's sort of interests and charities, and I think Tom will probably mention that too, and he'll talk about his role in the Devonshire Group. But the core purpose of Chatsworth is to preserve, restore and enhance our heritage assets. By protecting them, we mean spending significant sums of money from visitor income to enable us to keep them in good repair, to be able to share them, to interpret them, and to welcome people to see and to be part of the experience. Also to be a significant contributor to our communities and to be seen as a leader in the way we go about what we do. Some of the key things that the family have talked about is to embed learning in everything we do. And that's a key element in terms of our sort of work towards improving the well-being both of our colleagues at work, but also of those that visit us. And to increase opportunities for everybody to visit, to be fully accessible to a really, to everyone, and create more transformational visits rather than ones that are just transactional. And I noted that Mark saying about the research findings that came back. One of the things that the next generation at Chatsworth are very keen to do in terms of helping improve the whole well-being and quality of life and the experiences, so to move to these transformational visits, but to move away from us actually positioning ourselves as a visitor attraction, now to position ourselves as a cultural powerhouse. And that literally is just sort of hot off the press, and we're just starting with that at the moment. So we want our charitable activities of the Chatsworth House Trust to be the best in class and to deliver real benefit to everyone who connects with the Chatsworth House Trust. And our vision and our core values, you can see there, it's about doing decent things and also making a profit or a charitable surplus in a decent way. Next slide, please. Now, this is quite exciting because this opened at Chatsworth on the 9th of April, and the Art of Burning Man is basically at Chatsworth, and it's called Radical Horizons, the Art of Burning Man. There are 12 works of art, 12 sculptures that have, 8 of them have come over from Nevada, and they are now in the parkland at Chatsworth, which is free for everyone to access. And I must admit, I was the duty manager at Chatsworth yesterday, which was our bank holiday Monday, and to see everyone engaging with Wings of Glory that you can see here, when on the hour, he starts to gallop or canter and his wings move up and the flames come out. It's just incredible. And to see people taking photos with their family and friends, talking to everybody. And part of this, we are basically putting a marker in the sand that we want to be a place for everyone. We want people to feel like it's a place for me. There's so many different things that they can do and they can see. And this is really a marker for us in terms of this sort of cultural powerhouse journey. And it's really coming to life. And we think we're so excited about the research that we're doing and the well-being questions in terms of whether this has positively impacted on well-being, and for them to, to share their experience is all part of that evaluation and research of this. So I'm just going to wrap up really. So we'll go to the next slide, Amy, please. We really want to engage and connect with our visitors to create a lifelong connection that positively enriches their lives. And we can do this most successfully through the cultural assets that we have, both the built and the natural, the landscape, and to welcome everyone forever. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Yes, so I'm here to build on what Sally has already talked about and give it a bit of a context in terms of the Devonshire Group and sustainability as a sort of department, as a function within that. So yeah, my name is Tom Hendry, and I lead on sustainability within the Devonshire Group. But I always have to point out that sustainability is something that is done by colleagues across the group. I'm a tiny little department of two, and so it just wouldn't happen without colleagues getting involved and really engaging with that journey. So I'll talk about where this research sits within our sort of current reporting framework. As Sally said, there's lots of marketing research that goes on, but this is going to sit within quite a lot of data that we collect annually in order to measure success in a sort of holistic way. So the Devonshire Group, as Sally has touched on, isn't just Chatsworth, which is the photo in the middle there. We've got Bolton Abbey, the photo on the left in Yorkshire in the UK, and Lismore Castle on the photo on the right in County Waterford in Ireland. They're just part of the sort of businesses and charities throughout the UK and Ireland that make up the Devonshire Group, and our functions include farming, sustainable forestry, retail, luxury accommodation, and property development. So we do lots of different things, and sustainability kind of ties them all together, thankfully. Next slide, please, Amy. So our core purpose, Sally's already touched upon. The premise behind that is that that our future is intrinsically linked to the future of our local communities, those around us, our employees, visitors, suppliers, partners, and this is something we really embrace, because if the people around us thrive, then so will we, and vice versa. And so it's made up of three things: our core purpose, the first being to preserve and to look after our heritage assets, second being to a significant contributor to our community and communities around us, and also to be seen as a leader nationally and internationally in the way we go about doing things. Next slide, please. Because when we talk about being a significant contributor to wellbeing, we measure progress in terms of our triple bottom line. So that's our social, environmental, and economic contributions. Because by sort of reporting on this full range of impacts, sustainability can then be embedded into the process for key decision making. We have a TBL, triple bottom line steering group, which is chaired and championed by Lord Burlington, who's the current 12th Duke's son, and that group oversees initiatives to deliver improvements in terms of our triple bottom line. And it's also this way of thinking is also why we launched our 10 goals for 10 years, which Sally talked about back in 2019. And these long-term targets sort of serve to bring together and celebrate the work that we do, the good work that we do across our triple bottom line. So next slide, please. So I'd like to run you through a few of the things that we measure, starting with those relating to our environmental contributions. So we have an increasingly comprehensive understanding of our carbon balance, which includes emissions from things like our properties, also commuting, visitor transport, and also carbon sequestered by our forests. We measure our water consumption and waste production. We also have lots of data from ecological surveys. We've got a photo in there on the top right of a feisty curlew chasing a jackdaw away from his nest. We keep track of our land management, so in terms of our sustainable forestry and farming activities as well, and things linking to public transport connectivity as well. Think about buses and carbon-free travel. Next slide, please. In terms of economic sustainability, our economic contributions, I mean, I'm not an economist, so thankfully we are working with the University of Derby to deliver this, but we've been developing methods for calculating our economic impact in terms of gross value added and the jobs that supports. We're also looking at local spend, which is really interesting. So defining local as within 30 miles, thinking about how we get to at least 50% spend with local suppliers and services. Next slide, please. And then our reporting framework also includes lots of other measures linking to social well-being. So things like learning and outreach, public access, interpretation, volunteering opportunities, and colleague engagement, colleague satisfaction as well. And our charitable support, both in terms of financial support, but also enabling support. So the way we offer time, expertise, facilities, goods. The photo in the bottom right there is a fundraising appeal that we hosted for a local hospice. Next slide, please. So we began measuring these sort of environmental impacts back in 2013, and since then we've expanded our reporting framework to include quite an array of measures covering our triple bottom line, which gives a more holistic understanding of the many ways that our operations affect and hopefully benefit those around us. And by including such a range from across our operations, it means that colleagues and volunteers from across the Demetri Group are able to engage with our sustainability journey. And we have very strong leadership from the family, from the Duke and Duchess, and our senior executives. And this process, importantly, considers all three pillars of sustainability together. So, for example, an environmental initiative to deliver habitat, for example, it won't just be judged on its ability to do that, but also its ability to deliver other functions. So it's like economic viability, its impact on carbon sequestration or flood management, or the capacity to deliver sort of learning outcomes as well. And kind of touch upon the fact that sustainability means lots of different things, lots of different people, but by measuring and reporting this range of impacts across our triple bottom line, and then bringing them together under one roof, under one framework, we're able to ensure we have a holistic approach to key decision making, which hopefully ensures that our heritage assets survive and thrive long into the future. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Tom. And thank you to everyone else who has presented as well. We'd like to open up the floor now for questions. So if you would like to add any questions into the chat feature, or if you would like to unmute yourselves, whichever you feel most comfortable with. So I'll give you a minute or so.
Could I ask a question of Mark from Biltmore, please?
Yeah, of course you can.
No, just really great to see the humanistic value model. Quite complicated, lots of boxes and arrows and things. I'm wondering what the process of development for that was. How did you come about that?
Development of the model itself is what you're asking. Yes. Thank you for the question. It's my colleagues and I. There are four of us at the executive committee level that report to the chief executive officer, and we called a brainstorming offsite day that we got away from the estate, and we began talking about value and the different kinds of values that we might create, that we wanted to create experiences that ultimately the guests value and are willing to give their hard-earned money to experience. So we're trying to create long-term sustainable value. And we had a brainstorming session, and we have a group with a very high degree of emotional intelligence. And although that model looks complicated, we have since blown that down a further level down into strategies and tactics beneath each model, and how those are all interconnected. Because although it's a complex model, alignment between each activity really needs to be tight, or you could have competing values. And that's what you surely do not want competing values. You want supportive values. So we got in a room and we hashed it out and had some very robust discussion. and took the time commitment to do that. The development of the model was not that difficult. The explaining the model downline is incredibly difficult. That you're trying to get people to think that you've been taught a lot, at least here in schools, to think linearly. We're at A, then we're going to go to B, then C, then Z. This is a complex model where everything is interacting and in motion at the same time. So it takes not only the time commitment to build the model, it's how do you articulate the model in a compelling way as a leader that others understand it and build commitment to it. So it is an evolutionary process that we're still working through. Thank you for the question.
Mark, there's been a question about whether you'd be willing to share these amazing models you've done relating to humanistic management.
Of course, yes.
So can we share them afterwards? Maybe on the blog?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes, there's
Thanks,
nothing.
Mark.
There's nothing there that discloses anything that we wouldn't want disclosed. It's hopefully will be helpful to others to at least spur a conversation. What's right for Biltmore may not be right for Chatsworth. We all have our unique individual contexts. Although we have, as you've seen, so many similarities, we are working in different cultural contexts. So what's appropriate and what's expected in the United States may be different than what's expected and appropriate in the UK. So every organization has to take the model and give it time to think in your mind of what's appropriate and optimal for your own organization. But yes, I'm happy to share any model. Thank you.
I think the great thing, Mark, about this is the adaptive, how you can adapt. Like, we all take our own approaches, don't we? And every historic site, heritage site, organization will take their own approaches to developing ideas of social value and sustainability and models of management that work for them.
Yes, we refer to them as mental models. That it's not only a humanistic worldview, but there may be several mental models that people create, and understanding those interconnectivity is the key to that. So I would encourage using those, anything that I presented today as a starting point for what's right for your organization. Thank you.
I've also found, just starting a discussion, working with Tom and Sally and the triple bottom line, and thinking about how we work in social values and how we think about well-being within that holistic model, really useful actually for developing not only research but also developing how we think about the future of our heritage sites. And to me, as someone coming in who hasn't been working for an organization, a professional organization, for a while, it's been really fascinating to learn how you've adapted and adopted new methods to do that.
I'm sorry to jump back in, but if I can say one more thing, if there's anything that keeps me awake at night as a senior leader, it's not that, just as Sally mentioned, I don't worry that the estate will cease to exist. The family is committed to the estate. It will exist in some form or fashion for many more generations. What keeps me up at night worrying is that we become less relevant to our visitors. And if we lock into a single thought process, and we don't recognize these societal changes, evolutions that I mentioned earlier, and we don't adjust our stories and our aesthetic experiences to that, we could very easily become irrelevant or less relevant. And that has happened at several heritage sites in the United States that are suffering today, that had real difficulty coming out of the pandemic. So we've got to stay alert to what really drives well-being and human dignity, and be willing to change. It's incredibly difficult to change a culture. It's even more difficult to change a culture when people think they're successful. And so we have a belief that we're successful, but that's not good enough because the world is changing. So that's my current thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it is so similar in that respect, because we're not a place that is sort of, set in aspect. We are, we're living history, but also, we, like you say, the relevance to people. You know, why is this big house there? You know, why is it covered with bits of gold and goodness me, when there's all sorts of other things happening in the world? What are we actually doing? What's our core purpose, and how are we making that really important? And letting people, you know, into that story, because we haven't shared it really before. The other thing we've also started to do is to look at social prescribing. And really the whole thing to do for me, particularly with wellbeing, came to the fore during the lockdown. You know, people's appreciation for the green spaces, outdoors, you know, just being able to have the space to breathe and just, you know, like I say, a place for them was just unbelievable. And it really cemented in my mind that this is where we need to focus. It's not about the stuff. It's about that for me.
And Sally, I think that social prescribing thing is really interesting, because it's quite a new direction in the UK in terms of heritage sites and historic sites supporting, in essence, patients being referred to your projects, your programs, in order to support improving their mental health, you know, supporting their well-being. And this is something that's being supported at a national government level. And they are increasing projects that we're seeing and we're supporting as an organisation as well. And this is a real development. And I don't think this is happening in other countries yet, but I wonder if it's something that will start to happen as we provide more evidence of the impact that these sites have on people's mental health and well-being, and kind of as a preventative measure as well as a measure to improve well-being and mental health.
I have to pinch myself sometimes when at lunch I can go for a walk from the office into the parkland, and you know, and recognizing the benefits that has to my mental health. I'm incredibly lucky. So yeah, being able to offer that more widely is a very special thing.
To Sally's point, I'd also add that when you realize the storied experiences are incredibly important, it leads you to think about alternative storytelling in alternative voices. So we tend to have a bias to telling stories through the voice of the Vanderbilts, and we have just begun telling stories through the voice of the workers or the laborers or the people that help, the tradesmen that helped construct Biltmore House. That's a much different perspective that we found that our guests really relate to and find value in. So there's guest value in being open to alternative storytellings in alternative voices.
And I hope you don't mind me sharing, Mark, but that's evident in the results coming up from your surveys as well, that there's real well-being value, mental health value to those alternative stories being shown as well. So we're seeing that in the qualitative and quantitative evidence of people discussing about hearing and being told about these alternative stories, and it giving them a sense of belonging, and feeling that one of the phrases was that you care. And you care about sharing these stories, and therefore feeling more of a connection. And I think it's not only good for visitor experience, it's not only good for inclusivity, diversity, all these issues, but also for mental health and well-being, and for human dignity. I think, and I'm gonna have to be honest, I think we may have lost Amy.
Sorry, my computer has cut out. I'm joined again about 5 times throughout your discussion, so I've caught bits and pieces. So sorry about that. But I think we are out of time now, unfortunately. So I did share our email addresses, and they, I think, are on our feed loop profiles. So if there are any participants who are interested in finding out more from each of us, please do feel free to reach out to us. We hope that you found what we said interesting and have taken something away from it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Lovely to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.